Hello, and welcome to Auto Be Careful, the place for car safety news and information. I'm Gene, and today we're going to talk about how crash test dummies have evolved over the years and some of the current issues surrounding them. The need to study the effects of a vehicle collision on the human body began as soon as the first vehicle collision occurred. Unfortunately, crash test dummies weren't available at the time, so the scientific community had to come up with some creative solutions. They used living volunteers, animals, and the recently deceased. Now, there were moral and ethical issues surrounding these models, but there were also important research related issues as well. Living volunteers couldn't be physically injured, which limited the severity of those collisions. Animals didn't really represent humans, so it was difficult to draw comparisons. And cadavers were difficult for a few reasons. The researcher needed the permission of the family, the body couldn't have any previous injuries, and no two were the same size, shape, or weight. To overcome these issues, development began on anthropomorphic test devices, better known as crash test dummies. The first one was developed in the 1940s and was actually designed and used to test airplane ejector seats for pilots. This first device, called Sierra SAM, was used as the basis for future automotive crash test dummies. The first one used for automotive crash testing was introduced in 1966 and was specifically used to test seatbelt restraint systems in order to reduce the risk of head injuries in a collision. This was critical because at the time, 50% of all injuries and fatalities were due to head trauma. There were many improvements to crash test dummies over the next decade, but they continued to be primarily focused on preventing head injuries. The next big advancement in crash test dummy technology came in 1978 when the Hybrid 3 device was released, which greatly expanded the ability for researchers to study injuries to other areas of the body. This device was used as the standard until 2013 when the Thor device was released, which brought many incremental improvements, including making the device more human like and allowing for upgrades in sensor technology. This highlights one of the biggest problems with these devices, which is that it takes a long time to develop them. It took 10 years from the release of the first crash test dummy to create one that could be used to study injuries other than those to the head. After that, it took over 30 years to create the newest standard in crash test dummies, which was in development for roughly 2 decades. It's important to remember that these devices are incredibly complex and give us the ability to obtain repeatable results which can be compared from vehicle to vehicle. It's what allows the IIHS to create lists every year of the safest vehicles and the NHTSA to create star ratings for vehicles so that you can compare them side by side and determine which one is the safest. As you can imagine, with all of the research that goes into developing these, plus all of the technology that's packed into them, each one is pretty expensive. A single crash test dummy starts at a few $100,000 and goes all the way up to $1 million. Think about that for a second. Imagine spending the amount of money it would take to buy a home in cash and then taking the thing you spent all that money on and crashing it. Obviously, these devices are meant to be stressed, so they try to make them as durable as possible. They also design these devices to have replaceable components so that if part of a dummy is damaged or if a sensor stops working, it doesn't cost $1 million to buy a whole new one. Despite this, the devices are still pretty expensive, which adds tremendously to the cost of each individual crash test. And remember, every vehicle needs multiple crash tests in order to verify its safety, so this adds up pretty quickly. These devices need to be not only durable and repairable, but also incredibly accurate. It does no good if the device survives the collision but fails to get any readings, or worse, gets inaccurate ones. Our ability to compare results between collisions hinges on the ability to get repeatable results. With that in mind, before each test, the device is put through a calibration process. The head is removed and dropped 16 inches onto a hard surface to calibrate the sensors, then reattached and checked for proper neck flexibility. The dummy is also hit hard in the chest with a pendulum to make sure that the ribs flex appropriately. If any part of the dummy is broken, that part is replaced. One truly amazing feature of these devices is their ability to evolve without changing. A single crash test dummy can be fitted with up to 200 individual sensors throughout the body. This allows the entire apparatus to be updated without any change to the dummy itself. By upgrading or adding a sensor to the apparatus, it allows the researcher to collect more accurate or even new data to study. This is currently underway at the IIHS, which added rotational motion sensors to their dummies in 2012 to assess the risks of rotational brain injuries. They're developing formulas to evaluate these risks, and for the first time this year, these results will be available in technical reports so that manufacturers can start to look for ways to avoid them. These results may even appear in future crash test ratings. With the huge cost factor, it's no surprise that there's one crash test dummy that's used as the standard so that results can be compared from vehicle to vehicle. Unfortunately, that means there's not a whole lot of research done around different body types. Since the standard used in most crash tests is a 50th percentile male, there's growing concern that anyone who isn't represented by that body type could be at greater risk for injury. That includes anyone who's heavier, lighter, shorter, taller, plus entire categories of people like women and children. Now, historically, crash testing has been done with an occupant in the driver's seat, so a child is unlikely to be a candidate here. But there is growing concern about the safety of occupants in other seats like the second and third rows. There has been some mixed information about the importance of crash testing with a female crash test dummy in the driver's seat. On one hand, a recent analysis by the IIHS found that when vehicles are the same size and weight, the risk of an injury to the head or chest of a woman is about the same as the risk to a man, although it did find that the risk of a minor injury is twice as likely in women as it is in men, especially in the lower legs and feet. A recent report from the NHTSA found that the difference in risk of injury between men and women has been decreasing over recent years as newer vehicles have come out with better safety features. The difference in risk in 2000 was 18%, but dropped all the way down to 6.3% for vehicles made from 2010 to 2020, and even further down to 2.9% for vehicles made from 2015 to 2020. This data appears to indicate that there are potentially more effective areas that could be studied before putting a female crash test dummy in the driver's seat. On the other side of the argument, there's still growing concern about the lack of female representation in the driver's seat. Women have different physical characteristics than men, including muscular and bone structure. They also tend to sit closer to the steering wheel and are potentially more vulnerable to whiplash. And the industry is starting to respond to these calls to add this representation. The NHTSA began wide use of female crash test dummies starting in 2003, and as I mentioned in my 2025 IIHS Top Safety Picks video, starting in 2025, the moderate overlap front crash test began using a smaller female crash test dummy in the second row for the first time. This dummy is meant to represent both a smaller female as well as a roughly 12-year-old child, which covers multiple sections of the population. Adding to the coverage, more test dummies have been developed in the past few years, including adult females as well as overweight individuals, which will go a long way to making everyone safer. Crash testing has come a long way since the first automobile collision. There's still some obstacles that need to be addressed to get more comprehensive data, particularly in the areas of cost and adding representation for more body types. The great news is these challenges continue to be addressed by the research community in an effort to make sure that vehicles are as safe as possible. As always, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something, and remember to like and subscribe.